Thanks, Meg. And Kryss, I have to add you to my list of being, sharing the virtual stage. I love speaking with you. This is like I need another hand to count how many times we've been in conversation together. I know that we have about 30 minutes, so I just want to let everyone who's joining live, please drop your questions or comments or reflections in the chat box so we can flag that to Kryss, and she can tackle that before our time is up. But Kryss, is there anything else that you want to share about yourself for those of you who have not, who have not joined a chat where Kryss has, dropped a lot of knowledge? Kryss, let us know a little bit more about yourself before we get started here.
Goodness. Well, I guess sort of since we've only got 30 minutes, I should probably start by saying that there are links. Once things are recorded, one of the best part, well, there's a lot of best parts of Power to Fly, but one of the best parts is that the links become available later. So if there's some things we don't get to in our 30 minutes, go onto their website, check them out. You can go onto my website too. We've got lots of Power to Fly conversations we have had. They're always fun. They are never long enough. So it is exciting to get going. And this is actually, I think, the first US conversation I've had since the second book came out. I've been talking in a bunch of other countries, and this is the first time back home.
Okay, so just because we want you to do some shameless promotion, tell us about these books.
Happy to. Shameless promotion right there. It's like I've set it up for it. The first book I wrote is The Educator's Guide to LGBT plus inclusion. And it really works for anyone who works in schools or works with or has children to help guide on becoming more inclusive. It also works really well, I'm hearing from parents and guardians when a child comes out anywhere in the rainbow, that instead of having to answer all the same questions from a million family members, send them the book and then have the conversation so they have the foundation. When that first came out, the immediate feedback, in addition to really kind words, was I work in another industry, I work in a different business. When is my book coming? So the second book is exactly for that audience, which is most of our audience. And that is creating an LGBT plus inclusive workplace. And that's for current or future business leaders. So that's from anybody from your kid who's doing an internship that wants to grow up and run a business, or an entrepreneur, to somebody who's currently a CEO, and everybody in between.
Okay, so let's talk pronouns. I remember the first time that I met you virtually. We were speaking about this, and I just loved the examples, and the reflections that you brought to that conversation. So, can we start with first? Is it necessary to come out at work? Yes or no, in your opinion? I know there's probably some gray area as well. And if someone is interested in, coming out, what is the best way that you have found, is the most seamless way, the most holistic way, and the most respectable way, so where all parties are being respected and, work is done, no drama?
I mean, I don't know that anything is a guarantee of no drama. And it really, in the US, it depends what state you're in, sometimes what city or county you're in. In other countries, it varies based on the country or the city or the province. So knowing your local laws is a really important step to make sure that you're legally protected. In some places in the US, for example, it is included in the non-discrimination laws that you cannot be fired. It's in the federal laws, and coming in, and we're looking at something called the Equality Act to make everything federal in the US. We're not 100% there yet. And just the way that we have long ago banned racism in the workplace, we also still know that even though that's been illegal for a long time, it's still happening. So mindfulness that it is a risk to take. And also, my big belief is always start with the people you know will be supportive. Go there first. I've had people, when I've worked all sorts of jobs, that because I'm vocal about this, come out to me first because they know guaranteed I'm going to support them and love them just the same. And they know that if anything happens at work, they've got at least one person in the workplace who's going to shut down anybody that says anything transphobic or homophobic. And as important as it is that you're ready to advocate for yourself, it's really critical that you've had some people in your corner. And if you're not someone LGBT plus identified, becoming somebody that people can come out to is really, really vital. It's not only helpful for them to stay employed, it literally stops people from self-harm and suicide. So when somebody shares that detail about themselves, recognize that they're trusting you literally with their lives. That's not a piece of gossip. That's not something you share with anyone. You don't hint about it anywhere. You let them share with whom they're ready, when they're ready. And you just keep letting them know that whatever's said when they're in the room or out of the room, you've got them.
I'd love for you to dive in deeper there on allyship in the workplace, specifically when it comes to inclusion with LGBTQ plus folks. How can we use allyship to spark cultural change? Because as we know, and we've ranted on this a bunch, the B history is not often shared. So these seem like new concepts or new ideas that are coming to the surface. But the truth is, we only got the A side of history because you all know my gem is that we've all been colonized, so we all get one part of our history. How can we use allyship to spark cultural change, and starting in the workplace, which is a big front to start, right?
It really is. And I think for a lot of people, my personal belief, having done this and been in this space for a long time, is that my reaction is allyship is not enough. To be an ally just means you don't contribute to the problem. But a big part of the problem is how many people are silent. So there is no longer an option, and arguably maybe there never has been the option to do nothing, because we're now all aware of what happened. Whether it was the racism you didn't know about until you saw George Floyd's video, whether it was the homophobia you didn't know about until you've started to see the murders that have happened, or the transphobia that is happening, you can't unknow what you now know. So if you're doing nothing, you're already choosing a side. And that's been something very, very true and talked about since World War II and the Holocaust, that when you're silent, you're choosing the side of the oppressor. And that sounds really harsh. And I think a lot of people think like, well, unless someone is literally a Nazi, it's really not that bad. So calm down. And for you who's not being impacted, it's probably not that bad. But for the person who is being impacted and for the people who are in the same group who are witnessing it, it is that bad. And making other people continue to live in fear because you would rather not speak up, or you don't want to rock the boat or bug your boss or whatever it is that's making you quiet, is causing continued harm to people, not just in the workplace, but at the depths of who they are, which leads to bullying. It leads to attrition. It leads to people calling in sick more often, and people's bodies having immune system issues because the stress isn't what's supposed to happen in our bodies. So it's really looking at, if you feel like you've been an ally already, you got to step up your game. It's time to go from not contributing to the problem to intentionally contributing to a solution. If you are brand new, that's not a problem. I mean, it's not great, right? Like, we all wish everybody was further along in whatever our processes are, but everybody started someday somewhere. So if you happen to be somebody who for the very first time realized there's racism in America because you heard about George Floyd, because you heard about Breonna Taylor, if you're someone who's just now learning that transgender people are dying at huge rates, it's okay that this is brand new because now you're learning. One of the things that we know is that the life expectancy of a Black transgender woman in America is the same life expectancy as somebody born with cystic fibrosis, 37 years old. As somebody who is 38 years old, I'm already past that point in age, and I still get people who tell me how I'm a baby, which means these people are dying while they're still babies. And if this is brand new to you, welcome to the conversation. Not sarcastically, genuinely. If you're brand new, maybe the place you start is to be quiet. Maybe the place you start is you're quiet because you're learning, but you've got to be learning. If you're being quiet, it has to be because you're listening to what other people are sharing. When it comes to conversations, often people think they need to play the side of devil's advocate. The reality of it is, people who are experiencing oppression and marginalization and harm already met the devil. They don't need an advocate for the devil. They don't need you to undermine their experience or what about them, right? Those whataboutisms are only just harmful. I liken it to the idea of when you've got a scar or you've got a scab over an injury and somebody doesn't believe that you're injured. Some people are kind enough to pick at that scab and open the wound back up and bleed to show you what that injury is, right? That's when they're telling the stories of the first time as a Black person they got called the N-word. It's the first time that when they came out to a family member, the family member told them to get out of the house. They're picking at something that's scabbed and scarred over for themselves to show you what that blood looks like. So for you to do anything but be grateful and to take that and learn from it is just inappropriate. And for the people who don't know where to start, it's okay that you don't know. It's literally why I wrote the first 2 books I wrote. Depending what industry you're in, you're expected to know nothing. And there are books. Frederick Joseph is an author to look up. He consistently writes books for about the Black experience for white people to learn. His next book, and I don't know that he's released the title yet, is actually a co-author with an incredible woman who I'll be having a conversation with Power to Fly the day after tomorrow. So we can continue to grow that way. And again, one of the best things, well, all the things are the best things. It sounds like hyperbole and it's not. One of the things about Power to Fly is that it's always sort of building this weave of conversation. So what we're talking about now, you'll hear about again later this afternoon. You'll hear about why our brain gets afraid and how we counteract that in a conversation I'm having later today with a neuropsychologist. You'll hear about this when other people are bringing it up on Wednesday and on Thursday. And you'll also meet somebody who identifies as non-binary later today at the dance party at the end of tonight's event. So you'll see it from the logistical side. You'll hear about it from the way our brain and our science works. And you'll see a real person with non-binary joy dancing it out with you before we're done with today.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so much to unpack there. But one of the things that I want to just highlight is how you're saying, you know, the importance of creating the space to listen and to practice active listening, which I love speaking about emotional intelligence, and active listening is a huge part of that. It helps you become more self-aware. It helps you to practice empathy. It also gets this active part, you know, fueled up so that you can then, you know, have that trickle effect and make it work, you know, at work or at home. So let's move back to the workplace here, because one of the things that I'm most afraid of is you know, this productivity caliber that folks are holding at this unrealistic, you know, productivity. We need to be busy all the time, go, and that leaves less room to have these conversations, to really actively practice what we preach when we say we want to be inclusive, when we say we want to practice emotional intelligence and things like that. So this question reads, how can we start to rebuild company culture when we have a lot of new staff and everyone is busy, right? So of course, you know, we need to bring in the dollars, we need to get the data, we got new folks to train. How can folks make sure that they're not letting anything slide through the cracks, and that we are approaching this very important conversation?
So I think it sort of is a little bit unexpected with the answer, because I think the question asker is completely right. It's what we all know. Whatever industry you're in, there's never enough time to bring in more money. There's always something that somebody needs from you and they need it yesterday, but they just told you about it now. And somebody else's emergency becomes your emergency, and it never stops. This sort of interesting thing with it is that when a person is afraid, their brain cannot be productive and it cannot process what is happening. So if you think about a little kid, whether it's you as a little kid or a little kid you know, when a grown-up screams at a little kid and then they get done with the screaming and they're like, you weren't even listening to me. You tell me what I just said. And the kid can't answer. We as adults often think it's because that kid doesn't care, isn't paying attention, is being disrespectful. What's actually happening is that the brain is protecting the person. And when you're in protection mode, you can't actually hear what's going on and you can't actually process what's happening. So when we look at how do we make our workforce more productive, it seems counterintelligence like to think about, well, you stop everything and you have some conversations. Sounds ridiculous. But the reality of it is, without those conversations, some of your employees are frozen. They're only half hearing what somebody is saying. They're only half doing their work. And a good number of the time, they're taking more time off. They're getting sicker and staying sicker for longer. They're more at the risk. We talk about COVID, but also things like colds and flus that can spread around an office. They're more susceptible because their immune system is lesser because of the stress they're under. And they're more likely to quit their jobs and give less notice. So when you think at the big picture, if you want your employees to be super productive, if you want them to get sick less often, and you want them to not quit their job, And even if you want them to be somebody who tells other people, there's an opening coming up at my company, you really, really need to apply and do it right now because it's going to get filled. And you want those best people in the role, you have to be having these inclusion conversations. And when we're looking at what else we can be doing, it has to be ongoing. So often there's a conversation where a company will add a quick something to an onboarding process, and then we don't know what happens. Or we look at people like numbers, and then a company can brag and say, 32% of our workplace is non-white people. Great. That's a great thing to know and to be able to talk about. But also, what happens to them when they're in your company? Are those people getting the same mentorship experiences? Are they being promoted at the same consistency and rate? Is it different for Black men versus Black women versus Black non-binary people? Do you have non-binary people who work where you work? If you don't know these things, if you're not being mindful of these things, you're missing out on opportunities for people to be really, really productive. So your business actually suffers by not short-term slowing down to have some of these conversations.
So what are some red flags that someone can look for, just to make sure that they're not just, checking the box for being the queer person on the team or being, the person of color on the team, so that they can make sure that the workplace that they're entering into is truly inclusive, or at least working to be more inclusive? What are some red flags that someone can look for?
The sort of best thing and worst thing now is social media, and taking a look at what's being said and also what's not being said. There was a big push, for example, in the 24 to 48 hours after George Floyd's murder, and the video was everywhere. There was a big push at companies that had said nothing. It was no longer just enough that some companies said something, but the general public was recognizing, like, hey, I drink Coca-Cola every day. I like Coke over Pepsi, but Coke, I've been on your website and I've been on your social media and you haven't said anything about this. So what's going on? Or, it's Pride Month and I'm seeing rainbow stuff at your store all the time. But then when it's not Pride Month, you don't say anything. And the people who run your company, we can see in the public access, are donating a lot of money to conservative politicians who are trying to stop transgender people from living safely. Why are you putting rainbow stuff on your doors if this is the way you're behaving all the time? So just being able to take a look at what the social media websites look like, who are the people that are commenting, what are the conversations, those are giving us some sneak peeks and some insight into things. A lot of people also take a look at the company websites. Even though you're required by federal law to have certain non-discrimination listed items, like you have to say on there, you won't discriminate against somebody for their race or their gender or their disability. Like all those words are very specific and federally required, but any company that wants can add additional things to that list. So a company might say something in there about, among the things they don't discriminate for, they might also include how you wear your hair, which for a white person, years or decades ago, if I would have seen that, I would have thought like, so you don't care if my hair's curly today and straighter tomorrow? That's a bizarre thing, but I don't know, maybe the wife of the owner is, a hairstylist or something. Now that I look at it and I think about it, like, first of all, why did I assume the owner of the company was a man and had a wife? And also, why did I assume that that was at all for me or about me? Because the reality of it is, there are a lot of non-white people with a lot of stories about discrimination in the workplace because of the way they style their hair. So taking a look at what else got added, or looking at when you're doing the hiring paperwork or the job application, what's marked? Is it an option to list what your gender is, or do they only have the male or female boxes? If you are doing a basic interview, you can ask some questions and you can ask what the demographics are in the workplace. You can take a look. Most of the time on websites are happy to show about who their leadership board is. If all the leadership board looks to be 65-year-old white men, of course, we don't know if any of them might be trans identified, non-binary, gay. We don't know all the details. But we do know that if everybody's face looks the same, it's only one conversation being had, which isn't because anybody's bad. It's because you don't have diversity of thought when you have the same human in 8, 10, 20 different forms in a room. So just taking a peek at what's available before you even have to voice your questions can be a really great way to decide, is this somewhere I'm already safe? Or if it isn't, is this something I want to undertake? Do I see enough value or enough reason to potentially be the first of my demographic or my identity in this workplace to fight a fight for change because that's how I want to affect change? And if you say no because you don't want to have that fight, that's 100% you're right. You are not required to try to change the world by bleeding out in your workplace because you're the first of your kind.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think that's very important to make a note of, because I know it's very overwhelming at times. It's very frustrating. Why do we need to put ourselves in a box? Why do we even need to check a box? But let's say for the person that has decided, okay, this workspace is a safe space. I am on the fence on whether I need to let people know my identity. This question rings to that. So, what are some suggestions what are some suggested ways to help employees announce their transition when the employee isn't sure how they want to handle it? So this was a question that was submitted before this chat. So someone has taken into consideration what you just said. They have, navigated, is this safe or is this a toxic space? So this is a safe space. And now they're figuring out, how do I come out? How do I let my employees know?
Sure. So some of that can start with going to the human resources department. If you work somewhere with a big enough one, they likely already have policies in place because you've decided this is a space that's okay to be in. They probably have had somebody going through this process already there. If they don't, what it might mean is that you help them do some of the work. I'm a big believer that if they say to you, you come up with the policies, it doesn't always happen, but it's never a problem to say to them, fantastic, what's the consulting rate? Because I'm a big believer that people should be paid and compensated for giving of themselves, whether it's just extra hours of your regular job or contributing because of your identity. You should ask to be paid. If you're in the position where you make those decisions, you should expect to pay people. You shouldn't wait for them to ask you. You should tell them what the pay rate already is. And even if they undermine themselves by saying, oh no, I'm happy to do it, put the money in their paycheck. They're doing the work, they should be getting paid. At that point, when there is a policy, it's really up to what the person wants to share. Some people independently want to tell people little by little, or they tell the gossip in the office and they let the word spread. Some people don't say anything and they just add a name change or a pronoun change in their email signature. It might be that they say John and then in parentheses, formerly Jennifer at their name. It all is really dependent on how that person feels comfortable. And for each person, even if there's 100 people with the same identity, no identity is a monolith, which means that you can't assume that because one person in a demographic says this is how it is, that's always how it is for all people in that demographic. So giving the space for that and knowing that that might change over time. It might be that the first 3 people someone comes out to, it's very, very slow. And then at some point they're like, you know what? This is ridiculous. I'm just making a giant announcement. I'm buying a rainbow cake. I'm putting it in the office. It's going to say, yes, I'm gay on it and everyone can eat. Or it might be that they think that's what they're going to do. And they start to have the conversation or they go to the cake shop and they decide that's not what feels right for them after all. None of that is a wrong answer. None of that is better than another version of it. It's all specifically unique to who the individual is. But if that's you, do what works for you. If it's not you, just be ready to show up in whatever capacity they need. Whether it's that you're the first one to correct people when they use the wrong name, or you're the one that when the announcement happens that gets up and stands next to that person. Whether it's a physical thing or a verbal thing, you want to make it clear that you're in support and you're not willing to tolerate the behaviors of people who are not. It's not a place you can be quiet. It's a place you've got to speak up because their life probably does depend on it.
So I love that you're being very frank about this. Thank you so much for that. The importance of being real, knowing that people's lives are at stake, well-being is at stake. So thank you for highlighting that, Kryss. We've got about 2 more minutes left. I want to I know. I want to close though the conversation by speaking about school, because I know that we learn the ways that we learn to work are often, through our community, through our home, or through school. So what is the way that, our communities can help transform the way that inclusive practices are shared in curriculum? I know that's a huge thing to try to tap open in 2 minutes, but please share as much as you can.
Well, in 2 minutes, then I can just say by the book. Is that fair? Right. At the same time, a lot of it is just taking a look at where do people see themselves represented? And I think that can be a place that anybody can start, whatever your environment is. Are you having, it's a school, are you having books for kids where the kids in some of the books are in wheelchairs? Do you have books for kids where the parents might be the same gender? Do you have advertising material in your workplace where the families don't look the way your family looks? And the more mindful we are of representation and people seeing themselves, and the more conversations you have with people whose perspectives are not your own, the bigger your chance to grow and the bigger your chance to do it correctly, because you're not reliant only on your own experience or your own knowledge. And I know that we have to wrap up. I know, Mariella, you've got a website. Where should we go check it out?
Yes. Oh, I love that you always mention that. So thepositiveforceteam.org. And I'm going to be sharing some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful information these coming weeks. So thank you for flagging that. And Kryss, how can we follow you and support the great work
Sure.
that you're doing?
Sure. So I am at thisiskryss.com. This is KRYSS.com. If you have questions we didn't get to, or you want to keep some questions private, there's a contact on my website, thisiskryss.com. Or there's also access and links on there from previous Power to Fly conversations, whether you come at them from my website, whether you go on to Power to Fly's website and check them out that way. It's all up to you. Thank you for coming to Power to Fly. We will see you, or at least I will see you a little bit later today and on Thursday. And I know that one of our fearless leaders, Meg, has come back into the room to introduce the next people. I am thrilled to be here with Mariella, but equally excited for what's coming up next.
Yes. Thank you, Kryss. And we'll pass the mic back to you, Meg. Thank you so
Well, thank
much.
you, Meg. Thank you, Mariella.